The Sony a7R6 is one of the best hybrid cameras that you can buy today, with stellar photo and video performance. But even more important to us filmmakers, it shows us the direction that Sony is heading for a future a7S4 and FX3 Mark II. Hey, my name is Matt Johnson, and today I'm going to be reviewing the a7R6 from the perspective of a wedding/corporate and commercial filmmaker, and telling you not only whether it's a good choice for you to purchase, but also looking forward to a future where I believe that the pieces are falling into place for us to see Sony release a flagship video camera sooner rather than later. As always, for the sake of ethics, I want you to know this video is not paid or sponsored by Sony, but they did loan me this camera so I can make this review. But the first time that they see it is the first time that you see it whenever it is posted to YouTube, and I will sadly be returning it to them. Now, looking at the body of this camera, it doesn't look that different from the a7R5, and that isn't surprising. A lot of photographers and filmmakers, myself included, loved the new features that the a7R5 came with. Features like a fully articulating screen that flipped out, as well as tilted up and down, which was brand new to Sony and makes a return on this camera. In a perfect world for me, Sony would have figured out a way to put the tilting EVF from the FX2 on this camera, but I'm betting that they're going to keep that for the cinema line. The EVF on this camera has seen an upgrade though, to a 10-bit panel with DCI P3 color coverage that Sony says is 3 times brighter than the a7R5. Otherwise, there are a lot of smaller improvements to the body that I'm a big fan of, like how the lens mount here has a raised indicator that shows you exactly where you're supposed to insert the lens, which makes attaching lenses by feel without looking much easier. In addition, here is something cool that you will notice if you turn on the camera. All of the buttons on the rear are now backlit, which makes filming videos and taking photos in low light significantly easier. Don't worry though, if you don't want these lights on, there's a new backlight button on the top of the camera that you can use to turn them off and on with just a button press. Or you can also change the brightness of these lights in the menu. Oh, and speaking of lights, there's also a new tally light on the front of the camera here that will help you check if the camera's recording. And of course, this light can also be disabled in the settings if you want. Pop open the port covers on the side and you will see that the a7R6 copied the a7V, and that they've finally done away with the multi-interface connector that used micro USB, and you now have dual USB-C connectors, which is great to see, especially if you want to charge the camera while having external controls plugged in at the same time. These are all great and minor upgrades, right? Well, now it's time to talk about some bigger changes, and this first one is going to be a bit controversial. If you're coming from the a7R5 to the a7R6, you're going to notice that the grip feels slightly different. It's a bit larger, and the reason for that isn't just Sony wanting to improve the ergonomics of the camera. No, it's because of what's inside the grip. Yes, the a7R6 is the first Sony camera since 2018, way back when the a7 III came out, to come with a brand new battery. It has been over 8 years since we have seen Sony upgrade their batteries, but like I said, I do think this will be a bit controversial because these batteries are a bit larger in size, and more importantly, they are not backwards compatible, meaning that none of your older Sony Z series batteries will work with the R6. Thankfully, it doesn't look like Sony is upgrading the battery just for the sake of upgrading and making us buy all new batteries. No, there are some very useful features and capabilities that have been added to these new batteries. Namely, these batteries are only about 5% physically larger, but they also have 17% more storage capacity as well at 2670 mAh. Even better, they now support fast charging like many phones do these days, and it's great to see this phone technology come to camera batteries. And speaking of phone tech coming to batteries, there's also a new battery health feature that they support that will tell you if the batteries are still working well, and you can check the battery health both on your camera or on the new Sony charger by pressing this battery health button right in the middle. And this charger is actually where things start to get more interesting because it is a dual battery charger. And yes, I'm happy to tell you that the a7R6 comes not only with this charger, but with 2 batteries in the box. It feels like Sony is trying to soften the blow of telling filmmakers and photographers that they need to buy all new batteries because they're including 2 with every new camera that you buy. Now, with the announcement of this new battery, I want you to take a minute to think with me about the future. Sony has told me that this new battery supports more stable performance at high load shooting conditions. So whenever you consider that video recording is definitely a high load task, I have a theory. My theory is that I think that Sony pretty much maxed out their video recording capabilities with their older battery tech, and they really needed to upgrade all of the power systems on their camera to enable higher quality video recording that we will eventually see on a future A7S4 or FX3 Mark II, or probably both. This battery upgrade is already giving us higher resolution and frame rate video on the R6, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and I think it's going to be very beneficial for future Sony cameras as well, especially if we want to see them offer things like raw video recording. If you think about it too, this also may be why we did not see the A7 IV offer things like 6K video recording, because the power from the older battery wasn't enough for those extra features. In addition, there is another very big feature that the A7R6 supports that the A7 V did not as well, which also may be due to a lack of power from the older battery, and that is 32-bit float audio recording. Yes, it's finally happening with Sony cameras, and the first one to get this capability is the A7R6. Now, for how this 32-bit float recording works, Sony is taking a page from Panasonic, and they have created a new XLR adapter called the XLR-A4 that will attach to your camera's hot shoe and enable it to record 32-bit float audio. So unfortunately, unlike the Nikon ZR, which will record 32-bit float audio directly into the 3.5mm microphone jack, you will have to use this XLR adapter on Sony to get this functionality, but it is still greatly welcome because if you're recording audio and the gain is too loud in Eclipse, you can bring the audio levels down and recover it completely in your editing software, or likewise, if the sound is too quiet, you can bring up the audio levels without introducing noise into the footage. That is the magic of 32-bit float audio. And if you're curious about how the audio sounds on the A7R6 with this XLR adapter, here's an audio test. Hello, this is an audio quality test of the A7R6 with 32-bit float audio. So I have a Deity S Mic 3 up above my head right now, and it's running through this wire and into the hot shoe on top of the camera. So now you can hear how it sounds. We're going to be talking normally, a little bit quieter, just kind of like a normal conversation. But then when I'm really excited, I'm like, oh my gosh, look, it's working. This is crazy. And what's wild is that I'm looking at the meters, and I've set this input to auto, but it is showing that it is peaking on the meters. But 32-bit float audio, baby, I ain't worried. Let's see if we can bring those audio levels down, which I will, and then you'll be listening to it, and it'll sound great. So pretty cool. Good job, Sony. Glad to finally see 32-bit float audio in your cameras. Yes! Now, as far as when this XLR adapter will be released, Sony has told me that it may not be out at the same time as the camera, and it may come out a bit later. But regardless, I am very excited about it. 32-bit float, everything, baby. Anyways, back to talking about the future here for a second as well. I want you to remember, what accessory did the FX3 come with? An XLR handle. You can't tell me that Sony is not making a new filmmaking focused version of the XLR-A4 adapter that will work with the FX3 Mark II and give that future camera 32-bit float audio as well. Let's keep going here because we need to talk about what you get inside this camera. Just like with the A7 V, the A7R6 is using the new Bion's XR2 processor, which is much faster and more efficient, and it also fully integrates the AI autofocus chip that used to be separate into the main chip itself, which enables a new autofocus technology that Sony has called AI-based real-time AF Plus, which the plus is the new thing here. Basically, they've made subject recognition even better. Even if people are really far away or their eyes are really small, the camera can still detect them. It can better track one face in a big group of faces. It's just better. And in all of my testing, the autofocus of Sony cameras has been good for a very long time. And with the A7R6, you're getting basically the best autofocus ever. It's really great. And coming from the A7S III and an FX3, which have good autofocus, this is still a noticeable improvement even over that, which is great. crack open the body cap of the camera, or in my case, take off the lens here now, and you're going to be presented with a brand new, fully stacked backside illuminated sensor with 66.8 megapixels of resolution, which I feel like Sony is saying that precise number instead of 67 because they're trying to avoid the 6-7 meme with this camera. Regardless, I'm happy to tell you that IBIS has been improved by a half a stop, and while Sony ain't quite to Panasonic levels of stabilization yet, it's still very easy to use this camera handheld, and I really have no complaints there. More importantly, because this sensor is fully stacked and backside illuminated, Sony says they were able to squeeze out an extra stop of dynamic range, giving this camera 16 stops, up from 15 stops on the A7R5. Now, I haven't really been able to see this in my real world testing, but I can tell you that after using this camera for a couple weeks, the dynamic range is extremely good in S-Log3, and the colors and image that you get from the camera are stellar. Low light with this camera is also really interesting as well, because this is the first photo camera in Sony's history, I believe, where they actually confirmed that it is using a dual gain ISO sensor. Sony usually tells us that on their video sensor cameras like the FX3, because they support things like Cine EI mode, but with the A7R6, they happily inform me that it has base ISOs at 800 and 3200. So this is not going to be a total low light powerhouse like the FX3 with its second base ISO at 12,800, or even the A7V, which has a very respectable second base ISO of 8,000. But in my testing, it's still quite good in low light with pretty minimal noise, and I would still feel comfortable cranking it up to even ISO 32,000 if you needed to. Of course, though, we have to talk about frame rates and resolutions now, and this is where you start to see the new battery and Bion's XR2 start to flex a little bit, because this camera is now capable of recording in 8K at up to 30 frames per second with a 1.2x crop, which is up from 24 FPS on the A7R5, but more importantly, it can also record in 4K at up to 120 frames per second with no crop, as long as you disable the 4K angle of view priority mode, just like you had to do on the A7V to prevent it from having a crop as well. Seriously though, this is pretty crazy. 4K at 120 frames per second without a crop is a feature that I would expect from a fully dedicated video model of a camera, not a ultra high resolution photo first hybrid like the A7R5. What about overheating though, Matt? This camera doesn't have a fan, and you're right, but Sony is finally bringing one of my favorite features from the A7S III to their newer cameras like the A7V and A7R6, and that is their Sigma graphite heatsink technology. This is a passive cooling system that made it very difficult to overheat the A7S III, even though it didn't have a fan, and now this is available in the A7R6 as well. Sony even felt confident enough to tell me the overheating test that they had performed, where this camera was capable of recording in 77-degree Fahrenheit weather for 2 hours in 8K at 30 frames per second, or in 4K at 120 frames per second for, yes, 2 hours before it overheated, which, to be clear, I don't even know if the A7S III would last that long, or if you're recording at a much hotter 105 degrees weather, which we commonly experience in Texas in the summer. They said this camera, by their testing, would last for 30 minutes in 8K at 30 FPS, or 1 hour in 4K at 120 FPS, which that's really good. It sadly rained or was cloudy all the days that I was testing this camera. Welcome to May in Texas. So I wasn't able to do a proper overheating test like I would if this camera came out in July or August with the sun just beating down on it. I think the A7S III came out in August and it was brutal. But I can say that in all of my time recording indoors and outdoors, I never experienced overheating on the A7R6. I didn't even get a warning. And these are some major gains that we're seeing in regards to overheating in a camera without a fan. And I believe that's mostly due to combining this fantastic passive cooling heatsink with a much more efficient battery power system and the new Bion's XR2 chip. This is just great. And it really gives me hope that if we see an A7S4 in the future, we won't have to worry about overheating with that camera either. So, should you buy the A7R6? If you're a hybrid photographer and you want a camera that is going to absolutely knock it out of the park with photography, thanks to a truly massive 67 megapixel camera sensor, but that is also capable of recording 8K video at 30 FPS and 4K video at 120 FPS without overheating, with 32-bit float audio recording and better autofocus, the A7R6 gets my highest recommendation. Sony told me that pricing for this camera is going to come in between $4,500 to $4,700, which is definitely not cheap, but I feel like with everything that you're getting, it's definitely fair. Just budget a bit extra if you need to buy some more batteries and for that new XLR A4 hot shoe adapter. I will link to the A7R6 down in the video description if you want to check it out. And while you're down there, I will also link to my Sony autofocus cheat sheet. If you use a Sony camera and you want to guarantee that your shots are always in focus, there are several settings that Sony cameras ship with that out of the box, in my opinion, are wrong. I tested on the A7R6, they were wrong too. So you're going to want to change these settings right away. This cheat sheet is going to show you all the correct autofocus settings. You can download completely free at the link in the video description. Thanks so much for watching. Please like this video and subscribe if you want to see more videos about filmmaking and video editing, and have a great day.